Coming up, China has been hacking U.S. solar technology and collapsing the industry by reselling it to the United States on the cheap. Should Donald Trump confront the Chinese? We'll talk to Matt Card about it coming up next right here on the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. So China has been hacking U.S. solar tech and trying to collapse the industry by reselling it to the United States on the cheap. Should Donald Trump be confronting China? Well, to talk about it, Matt Card joins us now, Executive Vice President of Suniva. If I'm saying that right, Matt, good to have you on the program.
Thanks, Lars. You are saying it right. I appreciate you having me and the opportunity to chat.
Now, I have to tell you something. I have a little bit of a bias in that I don't have any solar cells on my roof. I don't object to them, but I'd like to see them pencil first. I'm not crazy about subsidies to solar companies. And I kind of like competition. But tell me what the Chinese have been doing wrong and what Donald Trump should be doing or might be doing with the Chinese to straighten it out.
Yeah, thanks. The issue here is really pretty straightforward. Over the last decade, China and its proxies have executed a targeted attack, economic and otherwise, through subsidies, through circumvention, through hacking and stealing, as you mentioned, through just an overwhelming flood of low-priced imports against what is a U.S.-born high-tech industry, solar cell and module manufacturing. The technology was actually born and developed in the United States, but it's been progressively targeted by foreign governments, particularly China's, over the last years. What that's resulted in is that over the last 5 years alone, as a result of this targeting, almost 30 U.S. manufacturers have been driven out of business. They've suffered mass layoffs or crippling financial harm. This is an issue that's not only a manufacturing issue, but it's a national energy security issue as well. And these attacks continue. Just 2 weeks ago, another U.S. manufacturer, this one based in Mississippi, announced that it will be closing its doors and laying off its entire workforce and attributed the reason to low-priced imports, again, primarily from China and its proxies in Southeast Asia.
Well, let me ask you this, because, again, I'm not an economics expert, but isn't it more likely that the reason Chinese imports can beat American-made is that American-made is made in the single highest corporate tax environment in the world. American-made is made in a very tough regulatory environment from everybody from OSHA to the EPA and everybody else, and China is not nearly so tough, that there are some decided structural advantages that you have making solar cells in China versus making solar cells in, say, Mississippi?
Well, I certainly understand the argument. It's an argument that's been made, but it's a bit of a canard. The reality is, if you look at the public financials or even the documentation, the actual cost to produce is very similar in the U.S. as it is to China.
How? But stop, Mr. Card. How is that possible when Chinese labor rates are nowhere near what American is? Chinese regulation is nowhere near what America is. Chinese taxation is nowhere near what American is. How can it be so similar?
Well, it's a simple matter of looking at their financials. They're reporting loss after loss after loss as well. So when you look at the cost of materials, when you look at the cost of labor, when you also factor in the cost of electricity, the power to run manufacturing plants, that's actually substantially cheaper in the United States than it is in China or in some of these other countries. So the costs are not the full distinction. What we saw in 2016 alone was a price collapse of between 35 and 40% on the cost of panels. Viewing financial statements from all of these, what you saw was while certainly shipments went higher, revenue actually went down and profit went down, even to reporting two losses. This is not the first time that's happened. Right in your own backyard, in 2012, 2014, our co-petitioner, company in Oregon by the name of SolarWorld, SolarWorld, exactly, brought two different anti-dumping cases, and the U.S. found overwhelmingly that Chinese industry, the U.S. government found overwhelmingly, Chinese industry was selling below cost. So while you certainly have regional differences that occur, those alone don't explain the vast difference that's occurred.
Well, see, I still don't understand how, if I'm running a plant in China or I'm running a plant in Oregon or Mississippi or wherever, I know that the worker's paycheck in Oregon or Mississippi is probably going to be 5 times that of the worker's paycheck in China. And unless I assume that the Chinese manufacturing is far more automated than the American manufacturing is far more automated than the Chinese, how is it that the cost of making the cells in both places is so similar?
So labor is a relatively small portion of the overall equation. raw materials, the materials that go into the products, those are relatively the same on a global level.
Okay.
But what you also don't have is what you also are kind of mitigating in your rationale there is the systemic subsidization that goes on, whether that is free land, free equipment, no tax structure. The cost of bringing up, the capital expense of bringing up a plant is largely mitigated because of institutional state-supported subsidization.
And by the way, you know that some of those plants like Solar World have also received massive tax breaks from local governments in the United States. So it's not, if we're telling the Chinese that they can't go about twisting the marketplace by offering up subsidies, we're doing the same kind of thing. We're a little bit of the the pot calling the kettle black.
Well, let's quantify massive, because what we're talking about is two different things. When you talk about economic development dollars that are generally available to any company in any industry in the United States, that may be tax abatements based on profits you make, and then compare that to what on the low side has been estimated by our own government, by private agencies, between $40 billion and $90 billion of subsidization to prop up the industry, primarily in China. Our definition of massive is very, very different.
That's a very good point. So what should Donald Trump be doing to try to correct this?
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate that question. As you're likely aware, we have a trade action that's in front of the U.S. government right now. It's gone through the ITC, the International Trade Commission. The International Trade Commission ruled unanimously from the free trade spectrum to the fair trade into the spectrum on the ITC that these imports cause damage. What this particular process allows is for the president to step in and say, we're going to stop this willful cheating. We're going to stop you moving factories from one location to another to avoid duties that we put in place. Mm-hmm. We're going to avoid that sort of thing. And we have the ability to basically say, enough is enough. We've given the president with this law the ability to say enough is enough. We don't care where you run in an attempt to avoid U.S. law. You're going to play by the rules of a fair market, and we're going to create fair and reciprocal trade for U.S. manufacturers. So the president has a wide range of options available to him, ranging from tariffs to import quotas to a combination of all of those to help control what has been a massively distorted market caused by unfairly subsidized imports.
I got to tell you something, Mr. Card. I'm not for protectionist measures, and this is one of the reasons I don't like this. First of all, we're protecting U.S. companies, except that one of the things you leave out is Solar World is a German company. Their U.S. subsidiary is the one that's making solar cells subsidized in America by American governments in competition with the Chinese who are making them, subsidized by the Chinese government. Should we engage in protectionism to protect a German company that's doing business in our country from producing low-cost solar cells, or allowing Americans who want to put them on their roofs to buy solar cells that are sold below cost by China? Because that sounds like a good deal for consumers, doesn't it?
So this is not protectionism. This is no more than what President Trump has called for at the UN, and he's frankly said all week on his Asia trip. This is about fair and reciprocal trade and commerce, and he's exactly right. You know, here in the U.S., whether you're a foreign invested company, a U.S. invested company, or whatever, we're expected to play by fair market rules. In the U.S., we're expected to operate under a fair market. We're expected to make a profit. Our competitors in Asia don't play by these rules. They have willfully and boldly cheated through subsidies, through circumvention, and, most egregiously, through hacking and IP theft. They laugh at the U.S. every time someone mentions free trade. They laugh all the way to the bank as American manufacturing workers head to the unemployment line.
Matt Card is Executive Vice President of Suniva. Mr. Card, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm glad to talk about the issue. I just think it's a thorny one for Americans to figure out where the subsidies are going and why we're paying so much for those solar cells when everybody complains that they're being sold below cost. I appreciate the time tonight.